This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. Gordon Lightfoot has died, but the show must go on because a budget showdown looms over the debt limit. Finally, Joe Biden called Kevin McCarthy. We'll tell you about that and all the headlines of the day coming up on the first hour of today's Hugh Hewitt Show.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel.
Morning glory, America. It's bonjour high time. Especially bonjour high to my Canadian friends. My friend Russ sent me a note that Gordon Lightfoot had died overnight. I loved Gordon Lightfoot. I saw him in concert a couple of times, but I love Canadian Trilogy. I love all the lovely ladies. I just loved Gordon Lightfoot. Great singer-songwriter. John Andraza called him that this morning on Twitter. He will be missed. That's the bad news. The very satisfactory news is that the Guardians came back and scored 3 in the top of the ninth last night and beat the Yankees in the Bronx. Take that, Guy Benson. So I'm very, very pleased about that. But the extraordinarily good news, and I'm going to focus on this right out of the box this morning and put it on the podcast. It's for everyone to hear on the Universe. By the way, over at the Universe, the subtext feature is up and running. And so now, if you're already a subscriber to the Universe, you just have to go and hit the text Hugh button. And I'm working my way back to you, babe. I'm getting to all of them, and I just did my first broadcast text to everyone so we can find out who people are supporting in my rolling focus group. If you're a member of the Universe, just go over to Universe. You can join it as well and find the subtext button on the side. No additional cost for doing that, but text and messaging rates may apply if you've got some, bare bones providers somewhere. You got to be aware of that. But if you text me, Dwayne or I will be seeing it and responding to you. And I just put out my first focus group ask. It's not in the form of a poll yet because I haven't figured that out. That's Dwayne's fault. But now let's get to the very important news of the day. Yesterday, the Supreme Court of the United States granted certiorari in the case of Loper Bright. Now, what you need to know about Loper Bright are not the facts, but that it involves the Chevron doctrine. And I'm going to let Paul Clement, the former Solicitor General of the United States, who is the leading lawyer in this case. He will be arguing it before the 9 when it arrives there sometime next fall. He was my guest in March when the petition for cert was pending. I want to walk back through that and play for you why it is important, what it's about. Better that Paul Clement explain it to you. He's the country's greatest Supreme Court advocate than I tell you about it. Cut number 19 from my March interview with former SG Paul Clement. This case of Loper Bright, though, caught my eye, Paul Clement, because I teach con law, and I try and explain Chevron deference, and even law students' eyes glaze over. But it can't be an issue for the administrative conference. It can't be an issue for administrative lawyers and professors. It matters to every small business in America carrying great burdens of regulation. Will you explain what Chevron deference is and then what Loper Bright is going to try and do?
I would be delighted to. So the thing about Chevron, at least that makes me so kind of concerned about it is, Hugh, if you and I have a lawsuit and we disagree about the meaning of a statute, the court is ultimately going to have to figure out which one of us is right, and there's no tiebreaker. They have to do all the work, and they have to get to a point where they just give their best impression as to what the statute means. But if instead of having a legal dispute with you, I have a legal dispute with a federal government agency, then instead of the courts having to get the statute just right and figure out what's the best reading of the statute, they essentially get to look at it, and unless the statute is clearly in my favor, then basically the courts will defer to the government. And that's really never made any sense to me. I mean, in a system where we're trying to protect the liberty of the individuals, you would think that the rule is, if the statute's unclear, the tie ought to go to the citizen, not that the tie ought to go to the government. But the rule is unfortunately the opposite.
In 1983-84, and we're going to talk about the plaintiffs especially. Let's go to cut number 20, more Paul Clement. But I was going to say, in 1983 to 84, when I clerked on the D.C. Circuit, it's before Chevron. And we had different tests. I mean, it was a mess, and no one quite knew what to do with it. But this Chevron deference came in after I stopped actually practicing, other than as an administrative lawyer looking for permits. It's completely changed the way that the government operates. And I don't know that, do you think the justices understand how absolutely indifferent agencies are to the average person approaching them for help?
I think some of the justices do. I think that is really one of the things that the change in personnel on the court over the last couple of years has really made a big difference, because I do think that Justice Kavanaugh saw this firsthand on the D.C. Circuit, even though Justice Gorsuch was out in Denver, administrative law was a particular focus of his. So he understands these issues. He understands the stakes. And I think they have an appreciation that the Chevron doctrine is problematic, both from the standpoint of the citizen facing the government in a particular case, but I think they also appreciate that it really kind of erodes the way the separation of powers is supposed to work in our system of government, because it makes it, frankly, too easy for the executive branch to legislate. And when you allow the executive branch to legislate, it makes it easier for Congress not to legislate and to just sit on the sidelines and let the executive branch try to deal with some of the big issues in society. And, you know, it's hard enough to call your congressperson and get their attention, but try getting a hold of some regulator at the National Marine Fisheries Service or the Environmental Protection Agency or fill in the blank. And, you know, they're not responsive. And they're not responsive for a reason that I think the framers of our Constitution would well understand. Why would they be responsive? They don't have to face the electorate. You know, the genius of the framers was they put most of the power and all of the power to legislate in the hands of people that were going to face the electorate, at least in the House of Representatives, and in the Senate, they were going to be responsive to the states. So the idea that the people who would pass laws that would tell you when you should fish and, you know, when you can pay for some government monitor to be stuck on your boat, which starts to get into the facts of our case, they assumed that those restrictions on our liberty would only be imposed by people we could pretty immediately vote out of office.
Now, he keeps going. That froze up there, I think. Let's go to cut number 21. So would you please tell our audience the facts, because no one's going to believe it?
I would be delighted to. So the first fact, which is really bad enough, and already is so bad that it did cause me to cite the Third Amendment to our Constitution in our reply brief. And I've been at this a long time, and I'm not sure I've gotten a chance to cite our Third Amendment before.
First time I've ever seen it.
The law itself does give the federal government the ability to force fishing vessels to essentially have a monitor who's a federal government's eyes and ears on their boat. And it is an incredible imposition when you understand that we're not talking about massive commercial boats with enough space for 20 or 30 fishermen. We're talking about relatively small fishing vessels that have enough room for 5, 6, 7, 8 people. And the idea that one of those 5, 6, 7, 8 people is going to be a government agent who's not going to do any fishing themselves and is just going to be there making sure that you're not taking too much of one kind of fish or another, that's bad enough. But that's not really what the case is about. What the case is really about is that without any authority from Congress, the agency has said, not only do you have to have this monitor on board, but you have to pay their salary. You have to foot the bill for having somebody whose full-time job is to take space on your boat and to make sure you're obeying the law.
Up to 20% of your catch, right? Up to 20% of your profits, you have to pay the government.
Absolutely, you have to pay for this monitor, and there are one or two places where the law does require a contribution from the vessel owner to pay for the monitor, but it's only for one or two situations. It's only with respect to larger commercial fisheries who can essentially afford it. But here's the kicker. The one or two places that Congress has authorized it, they limit the amount of the imposition to 2 or 3%. So here the agency gives itself the power, but then it doesn't put really any limit on it. And here it can be up to 20% of their profits go poof.
And they go poof, and the Supreme Court is going to weigh in. I got more of the Paul Clement interview, which I'll play in segment 3. I do have to play you President Biden at the Eid celebration in the White House yesterday. Boy, that was rough. He should not be running for president. But, go Supreme Court. Overturn Chevron. Return accountability to the agencies. Make Congress legislate. I'll be right back, America. Bravo, Paul Clement, and everyone involved in Loper Bright. Bravo. It goes to the court in the fall. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you so much for listening to Hugh Hewitt Show. Goodbye, Gordon Lightfoot. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt was not a Gordon Lightfoot fan, but she would go to concerts with me. My buddy Russ is. But he's Canadian, so that doesn't count. He's no longer Canadian, he's American, but he was Canadian. So he has to like Gordon Lightfoot. It's kind of, I think it's in the Canadian Constitution. But he's been playing around. I mean, that guy is a working musician. There's a clip out of him playing on the BBC in 1972 that John Androsik posted. Hey, let me check what gold did yesterday. And I do this because yesterday the Milken conference got underway. And I've only been to one of those things. And it's all high finance and investment bankers. And it's like going to the Democratic National Convention, right? No one here speaks my language of common sense and the Constitution. I'll get back to what Paul Clement said about Loper Bright to me in March in the next segment. But I want to read for you a quote from yesterday's Milken conference by Karen Carniol-Tambor. She's the co-investment director at Bridgewater. Quote, "It's time for markets to fully digest how constrained central banks are going to be relative to the last 30, 40 years. When every time there is a tiny murmur of a problem, you could just lower rates and print money." It's in the Financial Times. That's over. They're done. They can't do it anymore because they got to beat inflation. So that means markets don't like it. But gold is at $1,993. So we're in for a rough ride in the banking sector, and it's going to stay rough, even though it's not going to be a collapse or anything like that. We do not have an economic policy team that knows up from down or north from south, left from right, and Joe Biden has fallen asleep. But you can buy gold, and you can do it from Birch Gold via HughGold.com. Now, I got a text message from me. Why do you say that the universe has everything with no ads when, in fact, you have ads like Birch Gold? And I do. I mean, Birch Gold sponsors the market report, so I mention HughGold.com, and I say text my name to 989898, and Birch Gold will send you the information kit on how to set up a physical precious metals IRA, 401k SEP IRA that is legit in the eyes of the IRS, because Birch Gold is a third-party intermediary, and there are thousands of private reviews that are great on it. And I can't undo embedded sponsorships. That's how you make the world go round. We are not NPR. But on the Huniverse, not only do you get to text me, but you also don't have to listen to 22 minutes of news, weather, sports, and ads every hour to get the full 38 minutes of content every hour. That's why we say no ads on the Huniverse, but you still get an embedded ad. You still know goal is at 1993, and you get a bit of nugget like the Milken Institute. I want to play President Biden at the Eid event yesterday, particularly when he addresses the first Muslim district court judge, Zahid Qureshi, in the audience. Cut number 7.
Hey, Judge, how are you? I don't know why you wanted the job, man. I appoint all those federal judges, but, thank you for serving. I'm not kidding. You want to come and make a speech? Hush up, boy.
Hush up, boy. To Judge Zahid Qureshi. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Next, cut number 8. Joe Biden again at the Eid event.
The quorum teaches that one of his highest signs is the creation of heavens and earth.
All right, friends. The quorum teaches a lot of different things, but it doesn't teach that. Cut number 9.
We also have members of the House of Representatives here. Congressman Omar. Where are you, Congressman Omar? There you go. God love you. I'm not supposed to. I'll get in trouble for saying this, but you look beautiful tonight.
Yeah, you're not supposed to say that, President Biden. You're not. And then he struggles a bit with probably the most pronounced name in America for 20 years by many Americans, Joe Biden's age. Cut number 10.
Muslim culture is woven throughout the American culture in music, film, literature, fashion, and the arts. And we cheer for Muslim athletes like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I know him.
Really? Honestly, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I just can't believe that. President, don't run. Try and get through the next 2 years and try not to have any more public events at the White House. Tom Cotton always says we're better off as a country when the president isn't talking. Time for my relieffactor.com. I must tell you, this has been fabulous in the last 2 days. I can't find the thing you have to tear to open it, though, and I can't find my scissors. I got to take my relieffactor.com because there it is. It just opens so easily when you find the little tear in the thing. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. And I'll tell you what, yesterday I just trundled 3 because I wanted to test out the knee after I've been doubling down for a few days with relieffactor.com. Wanted to test the knee going upstairs again because there's tendonitis in it. Fine, it's kicked in finally. And we'll go 4 or 5 today, depending on what the fetching Mrs. Hewitt wants to do. It's a little bit chilly in the Beltway today. And we'll test it again. Whenever you get an injury, take a couple of days off, you ice it, you double down on relieffactor.com, and then you get out there and try it on the steps. And so yesterday was 3, today I'll do 4. We'll see how that works on the steps, and then if it hurts, you stop for a couple of days. Don't be a dummy about your exercise, but do take your relieffactor.com every day. $19.95 gets you started on it. Stay moving, stay out there, stay trundling. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show. More Paul Clement coming up. I always thought it was tough to hit the down note on Get Your Gummy. If you listen to bass in it. Well, never mind. Let's get back to Paul Clement. Loper Bright was granted cert yesterday. It won't be argued to the fall, but it's on the front page of every major newspaper because they figure, and the shudder you felt yesterday was the administrative state in the United States gasping for breath. And if you have tangled with agencies for 35 years like I have, you realize they're out of control, absolutely out of control. And part of it is the Chevron doctrine, which came down in 1984, that we have to defer to the expertise of the agencies in a close call. Paul Clement, former Solicitor General and the most accomplished advocate before the Supreme Court of our era, is the person who's going to be arguing Loper Bright. And he was with me in March talking about why the court should accept cert. They accepted certiorari yesterday. Let's go back to that. Cut number 22, Paul Clement talking to me about Loper. Yeah, General Clement, when I read the D.C. Circuit's opinion, which is a 2-1 opinion, I read that after I read your petition for cert before I wrote my Washington Post column. They seem to treat the Supreme Court new precedent on administrative law the way that the National Marine Fisheries Service treated the comment. It was like a Potemkin Village notice and comment here. 90% of the notice and comment responses said, don't do this, you'll kill us. And the National Marine Fisheries Service just dismissed them. Well, the D.C. Circuit took a look at what the Supreme Court's been saying about administrative law, and they said, we are fully aware of that, but this isn't that. And I said, oh my gosh, this is exactly that. I mean, isn't that your reaction? This is exactly what the major questions doctrine or other changes, maybe they just need a 2x4 to get it right.
Well, sometimes the court has to give an unmistakable message to the courts of appeals before they'll listen. You know, I had a case last term, completely different area of the law, but for years and years and years, the Supreme Court had basically been saying we've moved away from our Lemon test in the Establishment Clause context. And last term, the court got frustrated with lower courts not getting the message and just made it unmistakably clear in the case involving Coach Kennedy. And I think we may need something else in the administrative law area.
Yeah, a 2x4. We go on. Cut number 23. Frozen again? Cut number 23. Let's go there. Yeah. Because I think you're right. I got 30 years of experience with Rapanos. All right. Rapanos isn't 30 years old, but I did ACOE permitting for all those years. Rapanos comes down, and you don't have to know that, America, what it means, but it's clear direction of the Army Corps of Engineers that they're doing it wrong. And the Army Corps of Engineers proceeded to read Rapanos, Anthony Kennedy's opinion, and say, let's just continue doing what we want to do. It's like this vast kudzu of agencies that don't care about every effort to check them, Paul Clement. What do you want the court, if you could write the opinion for them, what would they say as a rule to replace Chevron?
Well, I would say, personally, the first step is you overrule Chevron, make it unmistakable, and then you just essentially force everybody to do their job. I mean, the courts just have to interpret the statutes. They can't put a thumb on the scale in favor of the government. If they're going to put a thumb on the scale anywhere, it should be on the side of the citizen. But they should just do their job. They should figure out what the statute means. They shouldn't defer to the agency in the process. And then I think the net effect of that will be to have the executive branch do less and have Congress essentially be forced to do more. And I'm sure many of your listeners don't think, Congress doing more sounds like necessarily a great idea. I suppose it depends on the Congress. But I do think our system of government is set up that the only people that should be legislating in Washington, D.C. ought to be the Congress. It shouldn't be people in the executive branch that nobody can get a hold of, nobody can complain, they aren't accountable to the electorate. And Hugh, I'll tell you what really attracted me to this case. I've had other cases where I've tried to cut back on Chevron, but I've been arguing for, on behalf of, major oil companies, major chemical companies. But this case, more than most, really kind of puts it on the level of the individual citizen, and it kind of puts Chevron in context to what it means to a small business person.
That is so important. It is so important. I try to communicate to you. When I had a landowner who all they had in this world was a piece of land, the Morgers in California. This is, my gosh, in the 90s. They're both dead now. And they had 600, they had a square mile of land, 640 acres, maybe 10 square miles of land. And they were going to sell it and make them money and retire. They'd held it forever. They didn't have a lot. They were modest people. And my client was the real estate developer that wanted to buy the property and develop it. But we could not get the Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to return phone calls. We could not get them to act. We could not do anything. And so the Morgers left this planet after 15 years of litigation, trying to get the agencies to act. They are indifferent to the American people. I am so happy this case is up there. Cut number 24, Paul Clement. Coda. They saw a federal monitor on a fishing boat screwing up the fishing boat, and it's a small business that's barely making ends meet. And I found that in my life. Big development, big landowners can deal with the agencies because they can hire me and people like me at ridiculous amounts to deal with a 7-year entitlement. Little landowners get crushed by the EPA. The Chevron deference actually puts the largest burden on the smallest clients.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And sophisticated clients know how to lobby agencies. When they get with the agency, they're not ignored the way that 90% of the commentators here were. And so I do think that Chevron, it seems like, just the name of the case, you just think big companies, being regulated by the federal government, hard to know who to root for. But in a case like this, where, you see these vessels are really, they are classic small businesses. They are being regulated, some of them virtually out of existence by these burdens. And so this is just really important. I really hope the court will take it. As you know, Hugh, getting the Supreme Court to take any one case is about the hardest thing to do in Washington. But I do think that, we have some great support from amici, friends of the court, but they are urging the court to take this case. We have something like 10 amicus briefs in support of this. We have people like you writing columns highlighting the case, and I thank you for that. So I think we have a lot going for us, but I really hope the court will take this case.
Cut number 10, more Paul Clement. And do you think you're going to run into that argument from our friends on the maybe center left side of the court? Your old Justice Kagan was Solicitor General Kagan first. Is she going to say, "Oh my gosh, you're proposing an unregulated world, Paul Clement"?
I don't think so. Look, I'm not saying that if this case gets up there, I will have every justice with me. But I think somebody like Justice Kagan, who has seen the full scope, the way I was obviously had the same job as she did. And when you have a job like that, you see all of the regulatory output of the federal government. And you realize that all these regulations are not created equal. There are some areas where the regulations work. There are other areas where, as you say, the real problem is regulatory capture, not overregulation. But then there are some areas where it's just the regulatory agencies are unchecked. And of course, we talked about this already, but where would you expect to see that? Would you expect to see Citibank overregulated? No. You'd expect to see people like these small fishing vessels and their operations overregulated because they just don't have the forces to fight back. And again, going back to just like the genius of the framers, they expected small businesses to mostly be regulated by the states and local governments where a small business still might have a foothold in the community, ability to get the ears of legislatures, get sympathy from other people in the community who the legislatures had to be respectful for. But when you have the federal government directly regulating small businesses, it's just not a fair fight.
It is not a fair fight. Keep going. Cut number 26. We got time. Well, now, General Clement, I can just hear Justice Brown Jackson or Justice Sotomayor saying, so you're saying that we should just dismantle the federal administrative process, where that we're just going to turn these people loose. I know you're not saying that, but you're going to need a different rule to come up with, right?
We are going to need a different rule, and the different rule in this context, though, I think is the rule that applies in almost every other area of the law. As we said at the outset, if you and I get in a lawsuit and the lawsuit turns in the meaning of the statute, the court decides the meaning of the statute, one of us is right, one of us is wrong, but one of us doesn't leave court with the court telling us, well, it was close, and we actually think the statute's unclear, and we're just going to go with the government because they're the government. I mean, that just doesn't, I don't think that passes the basic fairness test. So I don't think, this may not be the case. There are going to be other cases down the line, right, where the court wrestles with whether we can really even have some of these so-called independent agencies that aren't directly accountable to the president and end up being accountable to no one. And in those cases, it may be fair to ask, well, what's that going to mean for regulation? But here, I think in some respects, it's easier, because what's going to happen if the court moves away from Chevron is that courts will have to do their job, agencies will have to do their jobs, and I think the combined effect of that will force Congress to do its job.
That, I hope, is the result. I have posted a link over at my Twitter account to the entire interview. It's 25 minutes long if you want to listen to the whole thing, and to my Washington Post column, which the Solicitor General referred to, former Solicitor General Paul Clement. I posted that at Twitter as well. I want to let everyone know the Universe texting option is open, but if you're a Universe member, you have to go over and sign up for the texting option. It doesn't cost anything more. You have to give your name and your phone number so I can text you and send out a broadcast text to everyone. It's my new rolling focus group. If you listen to this show, you're a smart person. If you subscribe to the Universe, you're a very smart person. And I want to get the very smart person poll going. It is representative only of my audience, which is representative of the best and brightest in America. So thank you for listening. Go and join the Universe and come right back. David Drucker joins me next on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Welcome back, America. Not sure David Drucker is a Gordon Lightfoot fan. I was not even sure he was going to join me this morning because the White House Correspondents Association dinner was on Saturday night, and then the Met Gala was last night, and I assume that dapper David Drucker was at both of them. He, in fact, might have a tuxedo on this morning. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Hugh. I was actually at neither, but the impression is correct, and I do know who Gordon Lightfoot is. Loved his music.
Come on, you just took your tuxedo off because you want to mix it up with the hoi polloi this morning on the Hugh Hewitt show, and you don't want to be dapper David Drucker to him.
No. I like being known for my wardrobe, but I was in Chicago over the weekend. I had a panel to moderate on the state of the Republican Party as it moved from Reagan to Trump. With Matt Continetti, Mary Catherine Ham, and Olivia Troy. So that was my Sunday, which meant that
was that at the University of Chicago? Did Axelrod put that together? Because that's a great panel.
No, that was Chicago Humanities Festival, and it really was a great panel, and primarily for a liberal audience, and they really enjoyed it. I think it was educational for them. The night before, I was at Gibson's eating a big fat tomahawk with my boys, so I made up for it in different ways.
All right, that's fine. Now let's go to the president yesterday. He had another terrible day in the White House Rose Garden, David. I mean, it was a terrible press conference in the White House East Room on Eid. He made every mistake you can possibly make. Let me just play the audience who is just tuning in. I'm sure you've watched it already. Kareem's, that one is number 10. Let's go with number 10.
Muslim culture is woven throughout the American culture, music, film, literature, fashion, and the arts. And we cheer for Muslim athletes like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I know him, and I did mispronounce his name.
All right, so David, it's going to get worse. He's too doggone old to run for president again. Does everyone know? Is it a giant head fake to lay a open path for Gavin Newsom to swoop in New Hampshire, like Chris Sununu speculated to me last week?
So listen, I really don't think so, and I will tell you, Audrey Fahlberg and I just posted a rather lengthy piece at the Dispatch, and this was yesterday, taking a look at how Democrats feel about the president's age and how he's functioning and how they feel about him running for re-election, right? And he's 4 years older than he was the first time. Look, I will tell you that they're very blunt in that, they wish he wasn't this old. They would like to have either a younger, fresher Joe Biden or a younger, fresher face. Elections are often about the future, and it's very helpful when you have a young, fresh face, or at least somebody that is fresh. But they don't really believe, by and large, they don't have these concerns, I should say, Hugh, for the same reasons Republicans do, right? I mean, Republicans have talked about the president being, you use the word often, infirm, which is one way Republicans look at it. Others, they taunt him for, what they believe are cognitive issues or physical issues. Democrats don't believe that. Their concern is simply that when you're 80 years old, anything can happen, right? A simple mishap for you or I, because we're a lot younger, right? I'm 51, can be a really big deal when you're 80. They do not, however, have that much concern about him running for re-election without, and I say this in a particular way, without the benefit of a pandemic to keep him off the trail. They think, number one, he doesn't have to run in a primary, and he's got the benefit of Air Force One. And they expect him to travel. They pointed out to me a very healthy travel schedule this year already that compares very similarly to a 49-year-old Barack Obama at a similar point in his presidency. They also think that he is doing his job quite well. And so they just had to look at this in a different way. But nobody intimated to me that this is any kind of head fake. They believe the president's running. They believe he is their best available candidate given the circumstances, at least as long, and this is a big caveat for them, at least as long as Donald Trump appears to be the front runner. If there's ever a point at which Trump is not the front runner and it looks like almost any of the other Republican candidates either running or thinking of running could be the nominee instead, then I think you'll see a lot more anxiety on the part of Democrats.
David, in 8 days, Donald Trump is going to do a town hall with CNN, and that's a very good move by CNN. It's a very good move by the former president. He's going to stand up. He's going to take questions. Can you imagine Joe Biden doing a town hall on CNN? Can you even imagine it?
Well, he did it 4 years ago, and so I could imagine it. I think the question is, will he? And we're going to have to see. There was some talk that they were going to delay the announcement of his second campaign. He ended up doing it on essentially the 4-year anniversary of his third campaign, his last one. So I think that Joe Biden actually is going to be forced at times to do lots of these things to quell the concern about age and to not allow stories about his age to sort of spring up like wildfire, because you know how these things go, fair or not. When there is a broad concern about something and everybody's talking about it, then it can just kind of go everywhere. And look, I actually think the president understands this as much as anybody. In his press conference last week with the president of South Korea, he said, yeah, I get it. People are concerned. I was concerned. I thought about it. They're just going to have to watch me and make the decision for themselves.
He's not concerned enough, David M. Drucker, with the Dispatch. Follow him on Twitter at David M. Drucker, and you can go look at the Met Gala photographs of David over on Twitter as well. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. Senator Tom Cotton will be along. We'll talk about the debt limit showdown that is now afoot. Kevin McCarthy's been invited to the White House. This should take about an hour. It's not that complicated, but Joe Biden thinks it is. We'll ask Senator Cotton that and more. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel.
Matt Pottinger, it is very interesting to me that you... Matt Pottinger, it is very interesting... Matt Pottinger, it is very interesting... Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live inside the Beltway. Had lunch yesterday downtown with Phil Brady, former deputy counsel to President Bush. And we spent our time ragging on a fellow named Dick Hauser, who is another deputy counsel who's retired. He now supplements his income taking strokes from people at unsuspecting, rookies at golf courses throughout South Florida. Dick shows up, and he's a little bit older than I am, so he stands there and he looks a little thin, and he looks fit, but he says, I'm 80 years old. I would like 8 strokes. Is that fair? And they don't realize. Phil and I were talking. People do not realize the man's a scratch culture is a -1. But living on a fixed income, you just got to supplement every way. But we were downtown yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that the biggest change from when he and I and Dick served Ronald Reagan is to the fact that in the early 80s, our adversary was the USSR, and today it's China. And we talked a lot about D.C. and how things change slowly and everybody knows everyone, and that's true. What they don't know is that when new forces emerge, you got to pay attention. One of those new forces is Matt Pottinger. He spent 4 years in the Trump White House, last 2 as the Deputy National Security Advisor. He's now out in California with the Hoover Institution. Condoleezza Rice is the president of that. He is also affiliated with other think tanks, and Matt Pottinger is our leading China hawk. All right, Elbridge Colby is up there. There are other China hawks, but Matt Pottinger is number 1. Maybe Mike Pompeo is number 1, but he doesn't get to talk about China exclusively. He's got to talk about Ukraine. He's got to talk about everything. The former Secretary of State on Fox all the time. Matt Pottinger was my guest yesterday, and I kept him after the show to talk to him for another 15 minutes. And I want to play some of that for you right now so that you can hear what Pottinger told the world about the threat that is growing. Let's go to that tape of the post show yesterday with Matt Pottinger. Matt Pottinger, it is very interesting to me that you brought up the Kaiser. Last night in Great Contemporaries, I was reading Winston Churchill's essay on the Kaiser in exile in Holland, and he talked about how he miscalculated so badly, and that sort of Germany forced him to miscalculate. The Prussian military, the German people, the example of Frederick the Great, all pushed the Kaiser into they don't have this phrase, Churchill didn't use the phrase, rolling the iron dice. So after the wars of the 20th century, Germany and Japan emerged beaten. Japan is now very strong and very aware and preparing. Germany is very weak, very irresolute, led by a knucklehead, as far as I can tell, Schultz is. Why is Japan so on their toes and Germany so clueless about the new Berlin, which is Beijing, and the new Rome, which is Tehran, and the new whatever it is that is Moscow, the new Entente, the new Axis, China, Russia, Iran? Why is Germany clueless?
Well, look, the sort of different responses that you see between Germany on the one hand and Japan on the other is, first, it's the first rule of real estate: location, location, location. For the first 3 rules, Japan is right there in proximity. Japan is aware that if Taiwan were to be forcibly annexed by Beijing, that could be, in the words of some senior Japanese officials, an existential threat to Japan. It's harder to perceive that in Germany, far away. I think that strategic culture has really subsided in Germany in ways that are understandable for historical reasons, but which no longer serve Germany well today. It's sort of being reawakened in Japan. I think it was reawakened in part by the leadership of one of the great statesmen of this century, who was the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who, of course, was assassinated last year. His vision as a statesman for trying to deter a conflict, band together with the other democracies of the Indo-Pacific region. The fact we even talk about an Indo-Pacific is really in no small measure due to Prime Minister Abe himself and his view that India, as well as the United States and Australia and Japan, need to serve as a quad of democracies to deter a conflict. His vision, even in death, is succeeding. Prime Minister Kishida has really moved forward with Prime Minister Abe's goal of doubling defense spending over the next few years in Japan in order to try to deter a conflict. Germany, it's just culturally and let's face it, a very small number of large German enterprises, not the majority, by the way. When you look at the family-owned businesses that are the real backbone of the German economy, they are increasingly woke to the threat from China. It's really just a couple of 2 or 3 major industrial players that I'm looking at you, Volkswagen, that really have thrown their lot in with China. Their future right now depends on China, but Germany, even Germany has, and Europe as a whole, has a significant trade deficit with China. They don't need China as much as they think. They need the U.S. economy far more. If you just look at the figures, the U.S. is the biggest market for Europe by far. I think China might be 3rd place. So they just have to get used to a new reality. They've got to work harder to expand their markets in places other than China.
Matt Pottinger, I now want to turn to politics. The presidential campaign is underway. You're talking to Switzerland. I am a neutral. I don't have an opinion on who ought to be nominated. I may be asking a question at some point down the road at a presidential debate. If you were advising the presidential debate moderators on what to ask about China, of the 6 to 8 Republicans who are going to run against Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, and your successor in interest, Jake Sullivan, what question would you pose to those Republican presidential candidates?
One question I would ask is, do you believe in your heart of hearts that the Chinese Communist Party can be trained to play by the same rules that we play by, that if we just pressure them a little bit, that we can induce good behavior from a Chinese Communist Party dictatorship, given all that we know about it right now? We still see vestiges of this thinking. We saw it in the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's speech the other day. There were good aspects of her speech, don't get me wrong, a slightly more realistic view, but still embedded in there is this idea that we can open up China's markets wider. We can induce them to play by our rules, and I think that that's just hopelessly naive. And so I would test that group of Republican nominees on the stage to see whether they're still clinging to that unrealistic idea. That would be one of them, Hugh.
Would they dodge a question on how they would respond to an attack on Taiwan? Do you think that's too obviously a provocative question that they would have to avoid with word salad?
I think that President Biden has done us all a favor by speaking publicly 4 times now, quite clearly. I've read the context of his quotes. He knows exactly what he was doing. He's trying to restore and extend deterrence in the Western Pacific by saying that if China attacks Taiwan, he will order the United States to respond militarily to defend Taiwan. I think that bit of clarity is something that no future president or future candidate for the presidency should retreat from.
It's right there. We'll come back and we'll play a little bit more of Matt Pottinger after the break. Let me do a market update brought to you by Birch Gold. The thing I want you to know is something that I tweeted out earlier today. Birch Gold sells you gold. They sell you physical gold for your IRA, your 401k, your SEP IRA. They set it up. They administer it for you. They'll send you the free information kit. If you go to hughgold.com or text my name, Hugh, to 989898. What you don't know is what at the Milken Institute yesterday was said by one of the leading investment counselors in the world. Karen Carniol-Tambor of Bridgewater Associates said, quote, "It's time for the markets to fully digest how constrained central banks are going to be relative to the last 30, 40 years, when every time there was a tiny murmur of a problem, you could just lower rates and print money." End of quote. They can't do that anymore. The recession is coming. It's going to be bad. It's a Biden recession, and it's going to be stagflation because they're going to raise interest rates again today, 0.25 point. then they're going to try and back off. But gold is at 1,993 because gold keeps its value. It's not First Republic stock. It's not going to go to zero. It's not Silicon Valley Bank stock going to zero. It's not Signature Bank stock going to zero. It's not the various cryptocurrencies that went to zero. Gold holds its value. Go to hughgold.com, or text my name, Hugh, to 989898. Then come right back. You can text me, by the way, over at our Universe subtext account. We got to enter your phone number. It's free except for standard text messaging rates. We don't make any money off it. I just want to hear from you. And those are the people I listen to. My rolling focus group is at the Universe. Get on there and text. Speaking of ghosts from Wishing World, Generalissimo, are you there? Are you there?
I'm here.
I got a text message from our texters over at the universe today saying they love to listen to you and me. I said,
why would they love that?
I said, I don't know. Obviously, that person, Dwayne doesn't listen to me. For example, the Grand Old Pod is 5 days a week, but Dwayne insists on calling his the after show, which it isn't. It's the Grand Old Pod. And
it is the after show within the overall realm of the Grand Old Pod, but my after show is still my after show.
But you've got to label it the Grand Old Pod, the after show. It's called branding. Like myphdweightloss.com isn't Dwayne's after myphdweightloss.com. It's myphdweightloss.com. You don't get to change the name of the brand even though you're using it. I never changed
it. It was always the after show.
It was, but the after show was officially RIP'd and put under the Grand Old Pod for ease of the consumer.
Which is exactly
but it's still labeled that way. Let's go back to myphdweightloss.com.
Yes.
One of the texters objects that I say, it's commercial free. The universe. And it is commercial free. It's got, what I should say is it is free of news, weather, sports, and commercials. But occasionally we will embed something like myphdweightloss.com.
It's not embed free, right.
It's not embed free. So I want to be clear. I always want to be 864-644-1900. That's
864-644-1900.
You lost 50 pounds.
I did.
And you maintained it. You've kept it off. It's a great program. People are flocking to it, and for good reason.
As they should.
It works. It works. myphdweightloss.com. Now, if I can ask you about the texting.
Yes.
I sent out a broadcast text to all of the tech subscribers today, but they have to. We got thousands of people who are signed up for the universe and hundreds who are texting with us, but we want thousands texting with it. It doesn't cost them anything. Have you responded to even one text yet, Grumpy?
I have. I've responded to probably half a dozen. Actually, probably more than that.
Well, get on it, would you? They're complaining about you.
I have responded to the ones that are appropriate to respond to.
Well, they're mad at you, and I
no,
tell
they're
them
not mad at me. They love me.
Did you watch Carl's baseball coach?
I started to watch it. We had a little fun at your expense yesterday while you were AWOL.
What do you mean while I was AWOL?
You were gone for a while. You dropped a certain video that Carl and I were commenting on for a while. The video of
the Flash hitting an inside the park home run.
That was not he was out twice.
No, he wasn't. What are you ragging on my grandson?
Yes, I am. Because he needs to learn a life lesson. He missed first base and third base. He is out twice.
He got the game ball. The kid hit an inside the park home run. He's faster than Mercury.
He can get a participation trophy for.
No, he rounded the bases. The umpire did not. No, he didn't.
You're right. He rounded the bases. He didn't touch them, but he rounded them.
Did you notice his rounding third base took him into the dugout almost?
Right, and completely clear of third base.
No, the ump didn't call him out. So if the ump missed something, that's fine. He got the game ball.
Whoopee.
The Flash. I mean, he doesn't have his old grandpa's speed, but the kid can hit.
He doesn't have direction or the game of baseball down either.
So you were ragging on my grandson when I wasn't there.
Absolutely. He should have been out.
You guys are something else. You are something.
Carl was trying to say, "Have a heart," for crying out loud. It was,
You're an umpire. You were born to be an umpire and call people out and throw them out of the game.
Here's
9-year-olds hit inside.
A bit outside.
This is where it starts. If you say, well, if you say
this is where it starts.
If he doesn't have to touch first and third because it's a good-hearted moment,
this is where it starts.
In a few years, 2 + 2 equals 5.
This is where it starts.
Yes,
that is like you are ragging on a 9-year-old's first home run. I cannot believe that. You're banished.
It wasn't even a single.
Take him off, Jacob. Banish him. Grumpy umpires are the bane of everybody's life. Grumpy umpires calling out 9-year-olds on their first home run. because he rounded third
it
a little
wasn't
bit.
even a single.
He rounded
missed first.
He rounded for third a little bit wide. Okay, my relieffactor.com is kicking in. I just texted the fetching missus and said, "You want to go for today, or are you going to go off to whatever they call that, bar class or something?" She's going to bar class, so I have to trundle alone. But I will be trundling, and I'm so happy the knee is beginning to respond to ice and relieffactor.com, and the tendon is calming down, and I'll be able to go a little bit further today and a little bit further. Got to get ready for my annual 10K. I don't run races much anymore, but I do like that Beach to Beacon 10K in Maine whenever they hold that. And I was not last year, so I'm pretty confident I'm not going to be last again. Met a couple of 75-year-old runners last year, so I want to find them and say hello and say see you at the end at the finish line again, because they probably beat me, but I think I got to find the 90-year-olds.
It's like the rule of bears. You just have to be faster than the slowest person.
You just can't be last, and you got to touch first and third base. But I cannot. You are an umpire at heart, man. You are born to throw people out, call them out, and crush dreams.
And love
ReliefFactor.com. 1995 gets you started. I'll be right back, America. Go to ReliefFactor.com. Get your 3-week starter pack and feel better. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Yesterday, Matt Pottinger, one of the leading China hawks in America, joined me, and he stuck around after the broadcast to do another 15 minutes. I played the first part of that in this hour. Now I want to play the conclusion of that interview with Matt Pottinger from yesterday after the show, so you see it all. Here is my conversation with Matt Pottinger. That's a good question to ask then. So let me wrap up by asking you, our culture was prepared for decades for this Cold War with the Soviet Union. In fiction, in movies, in Time magazine showing us the correlation of forces, the little guys who stood for brigades, the number of tanks, the number of airplanes, the number of warheads. That's not in the water anymore. People don't know anything about the CCP. You speak Mandarin. We now have hundreds of Mandarin-speaking people entering the border. Do you think that the American people are aware, just in the culture, of the threat that is out there in the way that they were at least aware in the culture, thanks to Le Carre, of the Soviet threat? Are we now aware of the Chinese Communist Party threat?
I think the American people have a good baseline instinct about the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. We're not as well attuned to the modalities of Beijing's aggression. Beijing is the master of camouflaging its intentions and its activities to make them look normal, when in fact they're often undertaking very sophisticated influence activities. They're better at this than the Soviets ever were. And I think you should, I don't know if you've had Alex Josky on your show yet, who just wrote a terrific book called Spies and Lies, where doing open source research, he was able to show how the Chinese spy agencies are not only involved in espionage and stealing secrets and trade secrets, they are heavily involved in trying to convince influential people, elites, policymakers, business leaders in our society and other societies that China's intentions are benign, that China in its heart wants to liberalize, and that there's a faction fighting to liberalize, and that they have very deliberately played up those types of expectations in order to induce us to provide even greater economic and market support for China in ways that you talked about the tiger eating us last. We've been feeding a baby tiger, and it's not as big as we are, but it's a formidable tiger now. It's bigger than the mountain lions that I sometimes see in this part of the country where I live out west of the Rockies.
I have two last questions, Matt. My first job in the executive branch way long ago in 1984 was as a special assistant to two attorneys general for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. So I reviewed the warrants. It was before we had a national security division. And I mean, it was an eye-opening. I've never seen anything like it. I was unaware of the Soviets, the East Germans, the Cubans, who were under deep cover in the United States that we knew about and we followed. And so I haven't had a clearance since 1989. I do not know the extent and breadth of the Chinese Communist Party secret apparatus. Do you know? I mean, obviously you do know. Do you think Americans ought to hire a Chinese national on a green card without some kind of vetting? Now, I know that Mike Pompeo, Robert O'Brien, your colleagues, both in the Trump administration on the Nixon seminar, they're always careful to say, do not confuse hostility to the Chinese Communist Party with hostilities to Chinese and to Chinese Americans. And I agree. But I do know that no one would have hired a Soviet on a green card without thinking twice in the 80s. Are we hiring Chinese nationals on green cards without thinking twice now?
It's really interesting when there are certain things that we can be doing that are sort of low-hanging fruit ways to defend ourselves. Most of the Chinese students who come to the United States don't mean the United States harm. A lot of them want to stay in the United States. Chinese elites have never been more disaffected than they are right now with leadership of China under Xi Jinping. But there are things that we should do. For example, there's a Chinese scholarship program that a small percentage of Chinese students have arrived on, and that is a Chinese Communist Party plan that requires them to return to China and to carry back home with them everything that they learn and accumulate. I don't think we should be accepting students. And in fact, one of the things we did during the Trump administration was ban students into key technologies if they were on those Chinese government scholarships. But look, the counterintelligence threat is acute. The FBI director said just the other day that for every one official who's trying to protect our cyber domain, there are about 50 Chinese government-sponsored hackers in China. The FBI opens up a China-related case every 10 hours. If you look across the border in Canada, where there's a real serious drama that's unfolding right now, their counterintelligence officials and whistleblowers have gone public with the fact that China has been involved in a very sophisticated program to interfere in Canadian elections for the last several years, and may have successfully changed the outcome of several elections, both through illegal donations of money by the Chinese government and also using the WeChat social media platform and other media platforms to hobble candidates Beijing doesn't like and to amplify and support candidates it does like. This is why TikTok and WeChat are major problems in the United States, why we need to ban them. So look, it's formidable. We need our John le Carré we need brave producers and writers and distributors of popular content in Hollywood to carry content on these topics and educate.
I was unaware of the Canadian story, Matt Pottinger. That's interesting to me. I should be aware of that. I'm not, and I wonder how do you stay smart now that you're out of the government? When you were in the Deputy National Security Advisor, it all came to you. How do you stay smart using open sources now about what the CCP and Xi are up to?
Well, I've got a network of colleagues who are some of the best analysts of Chinese primary source documents in the world. Some of them are former intelligence officers. A lot of them are historians, former journalists, and the like. And we spend a lot of time. We write for Foreign Affairs magazine and other outlets about what we're seeing from Xi Jinping himself. There are other outlets that are out there that I think are useful summaries of Chinese and Western source media. Bill Bishop runs a newsletter most days called Sinosism, which I think is quite useful. And then just signal chats and different groups of people that I follow online keep me at least abreast of much of what's happening.
Matt Pottinger, thank you for your time this morning. I appreciate it. I hope you keep coming back. The Churchill Click needs Matt Pottinger in it, and I appreciate the time this morning. And I know you don't do Twitter, or where do people follow what you write, Matt?
Well, if you look at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's webpage or the Hoover Institution bio page for me, they post most of my what I write and a lot of the media interviews that I do. Like you said, I'm not on social media, but the Hoover Institution bio page for me has a running catalog of what I'm writing and talking about.
That's where people should go. Matt Pottinger, keep coming back. Thank you for joining me early on a Monday morning on the first day of May. Is that Matt Pottinger will be the National Security Advisor down the road and maybe the Secretary of State for a Marine. I mean, geez, like Gallagher. It's always amazing. I joke because I'm a civilian, but I've heard the other uniformed services make jokes about Marines, but I don't joke about them. My father-in-law, Colonel Helmer, was the best read person. I walked in. First day I met Colonel Helmer, I was going down to meet the fetching Mrs. Hewitt's parents. And I walked in, and they were seated. Mrs. Helmer was always seated. She used a wheelchair. Colonel Helmer was there, sitting next to her. And behind him was a bookcase of United States Marine Corps history. I mean, there's one thing about Marines I count on is that they will have books about Marines in their bookcase. And he sits down, he's got his Marine Corps issued black glasses, which are not unlike the black glasses I wear. I probably should credit Willie with that. He sits down, he looks me in the eye. He was wrong because he had predicted that my having gone to Harvard, he had told his daughter that I would pick her up wearing a Harvard tie, wearing a tie. And of course, that's an erroneous conclusion. And so he was wrong. So he was probably ill-esteemed anyway because he was wrong with the bet that he made with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt before she was the fetching Mrs. Hewitt. And I walked in and he looked at me in the eye and he said, "Do you know anything about Chesty Puller?" Now, I didn't. And I so confessed, "No, sir." And he looked at me a little bit funny. And then he waved a hand at the bookshelf behind him. And he said, "Well, you got to get to know some things." And I did my best. I learned my USMC history, November 10th, the Marine Corps birthday. But he's got a grandson, 2 grandsons on active duty in the Navy, and a grandson-in-law on active duty in the Navy. Honestly, he must be wondering what we did wrong. No Marines. But, I did get a very nice email from former Secretary of State Jim Baker about my father-in-law not long ago, telling me what a wonderful officer he was. He tried to get Jim to ship over, a young Jim Baker. He asked him to ship over, and Secretary Baker declined and pursued his legal education at that point. But it was just the nicest note to get about a guy who's gone to boot camp in the sky a long time ago. And but it made me laugh talking to Matt Pottinger, another Marine, who is, of course, like Mike Gallagher, about the smartest guys we've got going on China. And I do mean that, about the smartest guys that we have got going on China. Contrasted with the President of the United States, who was in the Rose Garden yesterday talking small business event, cut number 12.
I'm pleased to say that the regulators have taken action to facilitate the sale of First Republic Bank and ensure that all depositors are protected and the taxpayers are not on the hook.
Listen, that's not true. Every time the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation makes good deposits above $250,000, they are increasing the moral hazard of the entire banking structure, and the President of the United States wouldn't even know what I'm talking about. He's too doggone old. Marco Rubio just tweeted, "President Biden is being managed like an aging monarch. To limit the risk of damaging public interaction, he is kept mostly hidden inside the palace, except for the occasionally carefully scripted and tightly controlled public appearance." That is true. I'll talk about it with Bethany Mandel right after the break. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I am joined by Bethany Mandel, co-author of Stolen Youth and of many fine children's books. And I want to go to the children's books category here. How are you, Bethany?
I'm good. How are you?
I am terrific. Now, I am curious. I don't see your picture, so maybe we haven't turned that on yet. Do you, any of your brood, wow, you've changed locations. Where are you?
I have. I'm risking a BBC Dad moment. I'm in the middle of my house where I have better reception, but all of my children will be waking up momentarily. So I'm really
Oh, that's terrific. Is Truman around?
He's right
next to me. Is Truman there? All right, great.
Right here.
So, Bethany, do any of your many children play youth sports?
Yes. Irish dance, soccer.
Because my producer, Dwayne, is an umpire. He wanted to call out my 9-year-old grandson for not touching third base on his first home run. And this is what ruins youth sports. What do you think of the people who go to youth sports games, both the very loud parents and the obnoxious umpires?
So I've actually never had an experience with a crazy parent. I know that that's sort of the stereotype of youth sports, but everyone seems very apathetic, mostly on their phones, and just biding their time.
Bethany, wait. Just wait. Does Seth get involved in the game? Are you loud parents or quiet parents? I was always a quiet parent.
Not at all. I'm one of the biding their time people. As long as no one gets hurt, that's whatever. I don't care.
Do any of them swim yet?
No, but we do take swim lessons.
All right. I'm here to give you a pro tip. Volunteer to be the swimming judge at the swim meets. It's the least amount of work in all of youth sport. Do not volunteer for the concession stand. You'll never get the smell out. So that's my pro tip to you. Bethany, the president is too old to run. Marco Rubio just said he's being treated like an aging monarch. I'm sure you have elder people in your life. I mean, seniors, not super seniors. I'm a senior. I'm over 65. But Joe Biden, too old to run. Do you agree?
I do. And I agreed 4 years ago. I mean, he does remind me a lot of my very elderly grandfather, may he rest in peace. But the last couple of years where you sort of had to gently guide him as to like, this is where we are, this is what we're doing. I've gotten that vibe from Biden for a long time. And I think that everyone on his staff has. And that's why COVID was such a gift to his campaign, because he really could hide out and limit his interactions with the press because they never knew what he was going to say.
Now, it's a dangerous thing for the United States. Senator Cotton will be on. He'll say they should not let him speak in public. He mangled the Eid celebration yesterday, absolutely mangled it. And so he's infirm. That's the word I use. What word do you use if you use a word?
I mean, I would say a free fry short of a Happy Meal. It's the technical definition.
That is. Well, I like the idea of not indulging people who say he's demented or he's got Alzheimer's. He doesn't. He's functioning at the level of an 80-year-old who's in decline. And I just think everybody sees it and nobody talks about it.
Yeah, and it's unfair to him because he's had such an illustrious career. I mean, he has accomplished a lot, whether you like what he's accomplished or not. He has accomplished a great deal. But now it feels like a Weekend at Bernie's situation.
Okay, here's the test. And I'm not making fun of the joke that runs around about the president and kids. I'm talking seriously. Would you let the president stay with your 8 children for a weekend as the adult in charge?
No, because I don't think that he's functionally able to care for them in a manner that would keep everyone safe. I mean, you have a 3-year-old like this in your family. We have an eloping 3-year-old who will open the door and let herself out and let her 1-year-old out. And you have to have your wits about you at all times. And if that's the case in my own home, then, that should also be the case when you're the president of the United States. You should be able to have all your wits about you.
Yes, Genghis Kate let herself out yesterday in the middle of the thunderstorm that led to the tornado because she wanted to know what it was like to be out in a thunderstorm. So they got a picture of her running. I mean, that is, you can't have Joe Biden chasing after 3, much less 4 or 8 children, much less the United States of America. And it's not a bad test. If you can't be left with small children, there they are, then you really can't be president of the United States. Do you think he's really running, or is he just holding, we got a minute left, is he just holding the space for Gavin Newsom?
So, I mean, I think he is really running because Gavin Newsom is a really unsavory character. I don't think anyone likes him, even on the left. I mean, this was the problem with Biden in the first place. He ran because there was no other alternative, and they're still in the same place. Their bench is not deep.
They do have Gavin sitting out there. I mean, they got Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania and Jared Polis in Colorado, but that's about it. I mean, they really are thin.
It brings nothing but apathy for me. And you want someone who elicits strong feelings one way or the other. Biden and Obama, the right, there were sections of the right that really hated both. Polis people are like, okay, I'm not a fan. It's just total apathy on both sides. And that's not how you energize a campaign.
Well, I know what energizes me. I love your bookshelf. I love seeing Stolen Youth behind you. That's your book, Stolen Youth, which is still best-selling. Keep using that room. If the kids wander in, that's fine. It'll be like the South Korean professor who was an American in South Korea. We'll have that shot, although you may not want that. Bethany Mandel, follow her at Bethany Shondark on Twitter. Follow me to Mollie Hemingway next on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. Senator Tom Cotton will be along. We'll talk about the debt limit showdown that is now afoot. Kevin McCarthy's been invited to the White House. This should take about an hour. It's not that complicated, but Joe Biden thinks it is. We'll ask Senator Cotton that and more. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live inside the Beltway. I'm going to continue with my guest, Mollie Hemingway of Fox News and the Federalist, by talking about what I was talking about with Bethany Mandel. The president is too old to be the president. Good morning, Mollie. How are you?
Great. Good to be here with you.
First question is what I asked Bethany. Would you leave Joe Biden in charge of children over a weekend if those children were under the age of 12? Would you say, okay, Gramps, you're in charge of the kids. You're everything, just keep an eye on them. There are 3 or 4 of them. They're fine. Would you leave Joe Biden in charge of small children for a weekend?
No, for 1,000 reasons. And even if he is well-intentioned, I just don't know if he's up to the task. Yeah.
That's exactly the right answer. He's infirm. He's not incompetent. He's not got dementia. He doesn't have Alzheimer's. He's just infirm. Here he is yesterday in the Eid celebration in the East Room, calling on the country's first ever district court judge, who is a Muslim, Zahid Qureshi, who he appointed, cut number 7.
Hey, Judge, how are you? I don't know why you wanted the job, man. I appoint all those federal judges, but, thank you for serving. I'm not kidding. You want to come and make a speech? Hush up, boy.
Hush up, boy. Then this, cut number 10, trying to pronounce a name that all of America can pronounce. Cut number 10.
Muslim culture is woven throughout the American culture in music, film, literature, fashion, and the arts. And we cheer for Muslim athletes like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I know him, and I live.
Mollie Hemingway, this is not the Boosters Club. This is not even a state legislator. This is the presidency of the United States. He is infirm.
It is absolutely cringe-inducing to hear him talk this way, and it's happening all the time. I mean, he's never been the brightest bulb in the intellectual chandelier. Like, he's always had trouble, but it is getting really awful. I read something about how his staff don't want him to do anything on mornings, evenings, or weekends because that's when he's not doing as well. So even in daytime, this is what we get, and it's not good. And also, crises can happen at any hour of the day, and so we normally would want someone who would be capable at all hours of the day.
Senator Cotton will be on later. He'll say what he always says, which is they should keep the president hidden. Senator Rubio tweeted out 10 minutes ago, Biden is being managed like an aging monarch. To limit the risk of damaging public interaction, he is kept mostly hidden inside the palace, except for the occasionally carefully scripted and tightly controlled public appearance. These are senators. They don't want to say this, Mollie, but it is a situation that we have to deal with. The Democrats have to come up with somebody else.
Well, or do they? I mean, we have a media that ran his last campaign while he sat in his basement in his home. They cover up every slight. This is not major news. I mean, it's news to people who are well-informed, or people who are well-informed know this, but there are a lot of people who get nothing but effusive praise. Like, we just had the White House Correspondents' Dinner where we were praising people who gave sycophantic coverage to the president, just years after being hysterical beyond belief at the previous administration. So I think the problem is nobody thinks Biden's running the country. No one thinks Kamala Harris is running the country. They're props used by a lot of powerful people to just be stand-ins while they do whatever they want. And I think they can do it again because of how we run things these days.
Now, I have a theory that when Donald Trump does the CNN town hall that Caitlin Collins is going to moderate on May 10th, he is doing that to demonstrate the ability that he has, the energy that he has. People won't like his answers, or they will like his answers. That doesn't matter. The contrast will be, here I am live with CNN, Daniel in the lion's den for his supporters, crucify him for the people who don't like him, but he's there, Mollie. I cannot imagine President Biden doing an hour town hall with an opposing network, like on Fox, with Brett, for example. Could you?
No, and even if he were hopped up on goofy pills or whatever they do to keep him alert in the evenings, he still would do. He would not. He just simply wouldn't do it. But yeah, I think it does. It's a show of strength of a kind. I mean, I love how Ron DeSantis refuses to give any time to left-wing media. I think that's a very good approach. And having said that, if you are going to engage with left-wing media, you have to be ready to give it to them. That's something that Donald Trump has shown he's very good at. And so I'll be curious to see how this goes.
Yeah, I think the governor's joining me on Friday, and I'm prepared. I've got my face guard on. I'm wearing my mouthpiece because he'll punch me in the mouth if I say something stupid, and that's okay. I don't mind that. Let me go to the everybody knows. Hewitt rule number 25. Everybody knows. Okay, I always tell this to people when they tell me something that everybody knows, like, my son is gay or my daughter is a lesbian. I say, well, everybody knows that, and everybody knows certain things. Here's something everybody knows. St. Louis, sales of Bud Light have been plunging since the company enlisted the help of transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney in a marketing campaign last month. In the week that ended April 22nd, the brand's in-store sales plummeted more than 26%, according to Bump Williams Consulting. And the decline is only accelerating. The week before, sales dropped by 21%. The week before that, it was 11%. Everybody knows that was a terrible decision, Molly. And Bud Light is caught between trans activists and the rest of the country. What would you advise the CEO of Bud to do?
Well, it's interesting because they are in a catastrophically bad place. They did try to do that little mealy-mouthed, almost an apology, where they indicated regret at what they had done. But you look at what happens when the left gets angered by a corporation. They basically demand reparations. They demand changes in leadership. They demand cash money, large amounts of cash money, in order to let off the heat of boycotting a group. Now, I think that's what should happen with Budweiser. If they really want these customers back, they need to show true contrition. It's kind of like in a marriage. If you mess something up, you have to actually do something dramatic to show that you are repentant. They need to give a lot of money, to focus on the family or something like that. Do something really big and dramatic that changes the discourse and shows that they will not betray their customer base ever again.
Now, I approach the transgender issue this way, Molly. Families that are struggling with a child with gender dysphoria deserve nothing but compassion. I rarely talk about the issue, but I know it's a 90-10 issue. I know it. I feel it in my heart. It's a 90-10 issue. People do not want to legitimize surgery on minors that forever changes their gender or impairs their ability to function as an adult. I think it's 90-10. I don't talk about it because I have great compassion for parents who have children with difficulty. But the media is encouraging this by not stating the obvious.
It's because we should have compassion for people struggling with this that we need to be strong about what is healthy and right. And it's particularly acute when you're talking about underage people. But in general, biological distinctions are a gift from God. They are to be celebrated. It is healthy when we are not restrictive about what that means in terms of, like, if you're a girl, you have to do this, and if you're a boy, you have to do this. But mutilating healthy body parts is an abomination, and everybody knows it, I think. And it's something that anyone who cares about children in particular, but just even their fellow man, should speak clearly and beautifully about how things should be. And I'm actually heartened at how many people are doing a better job with that as they think about the issue more.
Now, I want to close with the Supreme Court. My old friend, and I mean a good friend, Judge Luttig, put out a statement to Dick Durbin that buried the lead. The lead is Congress has no authority over the United States Supreme Court to legislate a code of ethics. They don't. It would be unconstitutional. Judge Luttig wants the court to have such a code. He wants it to be adopted voluntarily, and that's fine. But I want to be clear about this because the American press is trying to indicate, now they're centered on Neil Gorsuch. You and I have talked about this. It's a campaign to delegitimize the court.
It's a coordinated operation. It looks highly funded. It has the influence of powerful dark money groups that are attacking the court. Of course, the full compliance of our corporate media, which are engaged in pretty much open propaganda. And you're absolutely right. I actually am a big fan of good, strong ethics guidelines. There is no authority in we have a constitution for a reason, and Congress does not oversee the courts, and they can't if we're going to have the self-governing republic that we have.
Last question, Molly. Ben Domenech wrote a great piece on the New Right, in which the New Right was complaining there's no agenda. My agenda for everyone is just uphold the Constitution. Do you think that's enough of an agenda for the New Right? I don't even think it's a thing, but do you think they ought to start with that?
Well, it is, except we do have the problem that we have some people adhering to a constitution, and then we have a very powerful group on the left that is basically operating in a totally different system. And I think a lot of people on the New Right are saying, this idea that you can just pretend things are the way they used to be isn't going to fly. We need to be much more aggressive in defending the country and the principles we care about.
And I think that comes out to start with the Constitution. Make sure people understand Loper Bright matters a lot. And good luck to Paul Clement when he argues it next fall. Mollie Hemingway, follow her on Twitter at MZ Hemingway. Follow me to the next segment of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
It's a very interesting thing to me, America. Welcome back. I'm Hugh Hewitt, Inside the Beltway. Senators Cotton and Senator Cornyn are coming up after the break. We'll talk about the debt limit and a declining president, an infirm president. It's a very interesting thing to watch Twitter this morning. People as different as Terry Pluto and Steve Inskeep. Okay, Terry is the best sports writer in America. He's my age. He's been covering the Cavs, Browns, Guards, and Ohio State for as long as I've been reading the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is forever. I subscribe to Cleveland.com. I listen to Terry's Talkin' podcast every week when it comes out. And he's a fabulous man and a fabulous writer. And he wrote very sadly about the passing of Gordon Lightfoot. And then Steve Inskeep is younger than we are, over at NPR. And he wrote about the sadness at the passing at Gordon Inskeep, of Gordon Lightfoot by Stephen Inskeep. I'm just kind of stunned. I like Gordon Lightfoot a lot. The fact of the matter is I didn't think that many other people did outside of Canada, but they do. Oh, all right. Let me bring you this story brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. You ought to call AndrewandTodd.com if you're moving and you're trying to buy a house. 888-888-1172. Or if you're a senior and you need a reverse mortgage, or if you just want to change houses in your neighborhood. Some of you have or want to do that, despite interest rates being up in the 5s, maybe the 6s. It's not going to get easier. This story is from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. The building boom is prolonging market pain. Construction employment is higher than ever, undermining bets that the Fed will soon pivot. The building boom has helped push unemployment to around its lowest level in more than 50 years, reported the Journal yesterday. This is perplexing investors who want to see the Federal Reserve switch course on interest rates. Construction spending and employment have risen to new records this year, boosted by government outlays for infrastructure, a domestic manufacturing renaissance, and a wave of apartment building that got off to a slow start during the pandemic, when prices for building materials such as lumber were sky high. Construction spending and employment have risen to new records this year, continues the Journal. And construction companies with job ranging from overhauls of airports to bathroom renovations say they have enough work booked to maintain payrolls for years in some cases. Even home builders who slowed down last year when rates began to rise are ramping up into the spring. The persistent strength in the sector that is usually among the first to suffer job losses when borrowing costs rise is undermining investor hopes that the Fed's aggressive interest rate increases would quickly slow inflation and rejuvenate the stock market. It also threatens to upend bets in the market that recession and lower rates are on the horizon. They are not on the horizon. And AndrewandTodd.com, they're with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They're lenders. They bank. They lend you the money. They underwrite the loan. They do soup to nuts. You fill out the form. They tell you how much you can borrow. They tell you how much you can refinance, and they get it done. Soup to nuts. And I've known Andrew Del Rey for 20-plus years and Todd for half that time. They've done my loans. They've done Dwayne's loans. They've done my family's loans. They've done Salem Executive loans. They've done thousands of your loans, and they're the people to call. 888-888-1172. But here is the deal, America. We have a housing shortage because of overregulation by an administrative state that ran crazy in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and aughts and stopped home building dead in its tracks and in the teens. And they're still doing so. The Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the EPA at the federal level, every state's got a bunch of monkey wrenches to throw in the process. You know, you talk about the California Coastal Commission. They've completely screwed up building along the coast in the coastal zone for where they regulate. And now Gavin Newsom wants affordable housing. It's impossible to build affordable housing in California. And that's not just California. It's Maine. It's Florida. It's Washington State. The four corners of the country. You can't build cheap housing. All right. And there's a housing boom, new housing, because people are not selling their houses. And you know why? Because they have interest rates in the 3s. Some of them have them in the 2s. Most of us are stuck in the 3s and the 4s, and that's fine. That's like historic lows. And maybe you're in the 5s and you're grumbling a little bit, but you know what? You got to get used to the 6s and the 7s. And I remind everyone in 1885, Fetching Mr. Hewitt and I bought our first townhouse, because you had to buy your first townhouse in Fairlington Village if you lived in D.C., and the interest rate was 12.5%. Right? 30-year fixed, 12.5%. That is the reality. Go to andrewandtodd.com before it goes back to 12.5%. It's in the sixes, maybe the fives. Maybe the fives. Get to the sixes. You'll be happy. Don't wait. Call andrewandtodd.com today, 888-888-1172. Coming up after the break, Senator Cornyn. Senator Cotton, then Senator Cornyn. But ReliefFactor.com sponsors the studio, and they sponsor this segment, and they sponsor this show, and I take it, I only took it once, and I take it twice. When a thing is working, because I did hurt the knee last week. I got some tendonitis going, and the stairways became ouch, ouch, ouch. And Genghis Kate was wondering why I wasn't running up the stairs after her. And it's because Grandpa was not chasing a 3-year-old this weekend. And the deal is, take your Icarian curcumin resveratrol twice a day. When you have a specific ailment, like I just did, a specific ailment, something has popped up, a minor ache and pain, some tendonitis in the knee, anything pops up, double down, it gets better. This is getting better. Did 3 yesterday. I'll do longer this morning. And I am telling you right now, if you want to feel better, take ReliefFactor.com every day. Tom Cotton is next. We'll talk about the president in the East Room yesterday. He's just too old. America is just too old. And Democrats, you know that. I know that. The Senate knows that. He's too old. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. Goodbye, Gordon Lightfoot. We will miss you. I'm joined now by United States Senator Tom Cotton of the great state of Arkansas. Good morning, Senator Cotton.
Good morning, Hugh. Good to be on with you.
Thank you. You got a couple of young lads. I hope they play baseball, and I hope you know that Generalissimo should never umpire their games, because he called out my grandson on a film of his inside the park home run this weekend. But, Senator, you've got a couple of young lads. This is a serious question. I asked Mollie Hemingway and Bethany Mandel this. Would you let the President of the United States, as infirm as he is, supervise those lads for a weekend?
Well, Hugh, first off, my boys do play baseball. They were very excited by the Red Sox winning the series this weekend over your Indians. But we're also excited. We're also excited that your Indians beat the Yankees last night in dramatic fashion.
Scored 3 in the top of the ninth. Yep.
So, no, of course, I would not allow President Biden to be in charge of my children for even a moment's notice, nor do I think many other parents would as well. Look, the president's condition is declining for everyone to see. Joe Biden is too old today to be president, much less at 86 if he seeks re-election. That's just the simple truth of the matter. The media is beginning to gingerly report stories like this, acknowledging that he basically only does public events between 10 and 4, and that he's being cloistered in the White House, protected from meetings. I mean, like, one reason why he hasn't met with Kevin McCarthy in months is I think his staff is worried that Kevin McCarthy would negotiate circles around him, and that they can't allow that to happen.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how the debt limit talks will go? I mean, who is going to actually make the decision here? Because I don't think the president can take in the information, the numbers, and make decisions and cut deals.
Well, Hugh, first off, I commend Kevin McCarthy and the House Republicans for passing a good bill last week that would increase our debt limit so we don't default on our debt, but also address the underlying causes of how we got $31 trillion in debt. And right now, that bill is the only game in town. Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer are demanding that Republicans in the Congress pass a debt ceiling with no reforms whatsoever. Hugh, that couldn't get 50 votes in the U.S. Senate, much less 60 votes. So what we should do is take up the bill that the House passed and begin to debate it in the Senate. Now, maybe Democrats want to play chicken with our national creditworthiness, and they'll filibuster that bill, but no other bill has a chance of passing right now in the Senate either. And if that's the case, then the next step would be for the president to sit down with Kevin McCarthy and begin to negotiate a bill that will both increase our debt limits in a responsible way that addresses the key drivers of our national debt.
Now, he is infirm, and so I just trying to imagine the meeting where they lay out the papers, sort of like if you've got a senior in your office as a lawyer, you can't really let him sign things unless you've got one of their kids with them who will attest that they are competent. They're going to have Jeff Zients or somebody else in there with him. Do you think Senator Schumer will be the de facto president for these negotiations?
No, Hugh. I mean, Schumer is being very cynical right now, which is typical in demanding that Republicans in the Congress do his work for him. But again, House Republicans passed a bill. They're the ones who have taken action to protect our nation's creditworthiness, but also to address the reasons that we got to $31 trillion in debt. And a much more important number right now is 218. That's the number of votes in the House that it takes to pass a bill, and they've already achieved that. Chuck Schumer has not achieved 60 votes, and he certainly won't achieve 60 votes with his preferred method, which is just an irresponsible, simple increase to the debt ceiling without any reforms to our runaway spending.
Okay, we agree on that. Now let's turn to the Judiciary Committee, which is going to hold a hearing on Supreme Court ethics. I would like to know, you're a member of Judiciary. Dick Durbin is putting it out that you actually have authority over the Supreme Court to regulate their financial disclosure. You don't. If you pass a law, you can pass a law. You can do anything you want. It's like anyone can file any lawsuit they want. They get dismissed. It is unconstitutional for the United States Congress to attempt to legislate about the Supreme Court's ethics practices. Agree or disagree?
Hugh, I'm not yet ready to agree or disagree. I think it's a close constitutional question, and there's people I respect on both sides of the matter, to include you. But more to the point of today's hearing, this is about trying to delegitimize the Supreme Court and try to intimidate it from adopting rulings that are consistent with the law and the Constitution, but inconsistent with Dick Durbin and the Democratic Party's policy priorities. And it's been a concerted series of hit jobs against conservative justices over the last month or so, starting with Clarence Thomas, moving on to Neil Gorsuch, moving on to Scalia School of Law. Every turn, you've had mainstream liberal media outlets working in concert with the Democratic Party to try to launch personal attacks against conservative justices, when in reality, as those stories acknowledge, there's nothing contrary to law or regulations or ethics codes that they've done.
Well, I applaud your caution because a good senator should hear both sides. But to me, it is basic constitutional law, like the term limits case. What is it? U.S. term limits v. Thornton, where the court ruled you can neither add from nor subtract to the qualifications for office. The only remedy that the Congress has is impeachment if the Supreme Court justice has done something wrong. Abe Fortas quit because he was double dealing and breaking every rule in the book, and probably was going to be liable for criminal penalties like Spiro Agnew. This just seems to me to be a circus, and now CNN and others have got the bit in their mouth, the Post especially, my friend Ruth Marcus. They really think you guys can pass a law. You can't. I mean, I hope you get a witness.
The left has the bit in their mouth for sure, and they are, again, trying to use this hearing to delegitimize the court because they don't like the court's rulings that are consistent with the Constitution and our original understanding of that document. If they're so exercised about dealings with family and friends and so forth, maybe they could pay a little bit more attention in the liberal media to what happened in Batesville, Arkansas yesterday, where Hunter Biden, once again, is trying to evade responsibility for a child he fathered, a child that Joe Biden and Jill Biden won't even recognize with a stocking on their Christmas mantle when they hang stockings for their cat and their dog, pleading poverty down in Arkansas so he can reduce child support payments for his daughter while all of his father's rich friends and family members are paying for his mansions, flying him around the country and taking him to Ireland and buying his finger paintings for $500,000 a year. If they are worried about double dealing with family and friends, they should be looking to the courthouse in Batesville, Arkansas, not the courthouse across from the United States Capitol.
Did he show up for the hearing this time?
He did show up. The judge last week ordered him to show up. As she said yesterday in the hearing, Hugh, that this case was a very normal case up until January. And I remind you how this case restarted. In 2020, they reached a settlement, as parents often do, on child support and presumably other matters. I don't know the terms of it. It was sealed, as these things usually are. And last September, Hunter Biden, not London Roberts, Hunter Biden went to court to try to revive that settlement. Again, pleading poverty, saying he didn't have enough money to support his child, even though he was living in mansions all across America and selling his finger paintings for $500,000 a year or $500,000 a painting to his dad's friends. And then the judge said yesterday in January, the case just dried up. There's no more cooperation. And I think that probably was that Hunter Biden realized that he was going to have to start revealing the details of his financial situation. And how is it that a man that drives a Porsche and lives in mansions and jets around on private planes and can afford Abby Lowell as a lawyer can't afford his child support payments? So if
Abby Lowell is not cheap. That is not an inexpensive, good lawyer, but he's not inexpensive.
Well, Hugh, the picture in the courtroom spoke for itself yesterday, and London Roberts' lawyer made this point. It's like, look, he has Abby Lowell and big law firm partners from Chicago and Los Angeles and one of the top domestic relations lawyers in Texas sitting at that table. How is he affording all that? How can he come into this court and pay Abby Lowell's hourly rate, which is probably more expensive than some people's car payments each month, and surely more expensive than some people's car payments each month, actually, and plead poverty? And the answer is, no doubt, that Joe Biden and his family and their friends and donors have arranged Hunter Biden's financial affairs so he can lead the lavish lifestyle, yet plead poverty when it comes to showing his own actual income.
I was unaware of who he had at the benches. I did not know his legal team. That is $3,000 an hour if that's $1 an hour.
Exactly. And again, remember, he's the one that restarted this case. They reached a settlement in 2020. It was going to allow my constituent to live quietly in her hometown and raise her daughter that Joe Biden and Joe Biden won't even acknowledge exists when Joe Biden runs around claiming he has 6 grandchildren, not 7 grandchildren, And Hunter Biden is the one that went into court in September and pleaded poverty, said, I need to reopen this case so I don't have to pay as much child support, even while he's selling finger paintings for $500,000 each and living in mansions all around the country.
Right,
and
let's close.
Abby Lowell's hourly rate.
That is astonishing. I didn't know that. Let's close with Loper Bright. Yesterday, the United States Supreme Court granted certiorari in Loper Bright. I've had Paul Clement on this show to discuss it. It is the case in which the Chevron doctrine can and I hope will be overturned. What do you, as a member of the Judiciary Committee, think about the court returning to revisit Chevron deference, Senator Cotton?
Well, I'm glad they granted cert in this case. I heard that interview with Paul Clement, an outstanding Supreme Court litigator, and not just as a member of the judiciary, but as a member of the Senate. I think it will help put responsibility back where it belongs, on the shoulders of the people's elected representatives. Chevron deference has in some ways aided the rise of a gargantuan administrative state that is ever spreading its reach into more minute and private details of everyday life.
You know, when you have your hearing today, I wish you would advise the chairman the time would be better spent educating the American public on Loper Bright and the administrative state than harassing the justices of the United States Supreme Court over whom you have no authority concerning their financial disclosures. But that's just me. I'm not a senator. So good luck on the Judiciary Committee today, because I just think this is a hit job. I really do. I do not think people understand what is going on here. Let's close with that. This, as you say, it's very, very well-financed attack on the court for the purposes of delegitimizing it, to pave the way for expanding it, which will mean the end of the rule of law.
That is absolutely right, Hugh. It is a well-financed and orchestrated hit job by the Democratic Party, progressive activists, and the liberal media to try to attack, smear, and intimidate conservative justices from upholding the Constitution and the law. As Justice Alito said in a recent interview, like the leak of that the Dobbs opinion last year, it caused people to try to assassinate justices.
Well, good luck in that hearing today. Senator Cotton, always a pleasure to talk to you. Don't get Dwayne as an umpire for the kids. Stay tuned, America. He's a Red Sox fan, but we still like him. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I guess it's because he went to Harvard and Harvard Law. He's a Red Sox fan. That's a very sad thing. But the Guardians did beat the Yankees by scoring 3 at the top of the ninth last night, so it's a good morning. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to salemnewschannel.com or download the app. You can also watch on Roku and Fire Stick. Salem News Channel, the antidote to the mainstream media.
Welcome back, America. Gordon Lightfoot, dead at the age of 84. I noted that Senator John Cornyn on Twitter earlier today tweeted out a little tribute to the Canadian rocker. You know, he performed this song in 1969, Senator Cornyn, on the BBC. Gordon Lightfoot's been around a long time.
Well, you and I have too, Hugh, I guess if you remember him, but one of my favorites is, strangely enough, Canadian Railroad Trilogy by Gordon Lightfoot. People can look that up. It's one of my favorites.
We'll go out with that because I agree with you. Senator, you're on the Judiciary Committee. I just had Senator Cotton on. I'll put the same question to you that I put to him. He demurred. I do not believe the United States Congress has any authority to compel any kind of financial disclosure from the Supreme Court. That is U.S. term limits v. Thornton. You can neither add to nor subtract from the qualifications for any office. All the Congress can do is impeach a justice if they want to. They cannot regulate their conduct. What do you think?
Well, as usual, I agree with you, Hugh. I went back and I looked at the clip of Joe Biden presiding over the Judiciary Committee hearing of Clarence Thomas in 1991. Folks that aren't our vintage may not remember where Clarence Thomas defended himself, calling the false attacks against him a high-tech lynching. The attacks against Clarence Thomas haven't stopped since 1991. He's an honorable man. I know Harlan Crow personally. He's an honorable man. This is just a political smear tactic to try to delegitimize the Supreme Court.
And Senator, Justice Gorsuch is an honorable man, and they got after him and the Scalia School of Law is a great law school, and they're going after them. By they, I mean hard left. Senator Cotton suggested they're funded by dark money groups. I don't know where they're funded from, but I do know we ought to begin with the Constitution, and it's a separate but equal branch. You were a member of the Texas Judiciary. I do not know what the Texas Constitution says about that, but you folks have nothing to do with the Supreme Court after you appoint them, period.
That's right. That's right. This Justice Scalia, among others, pointed out that the one thing that distinguishes our country and our system of government from every other one in the world, including the old Soviet Union, which had a pretty nice constitution on paper, but they didn't have an independent judiciary. And so the independence of the judiciary are really the crown jewels of our system of government and what distinguishes us from every other democracy in the world. And this is an attack against the independence of the judiciary. And as Justice Alito pointed out, this can have very dangerous consequences when the justices are targeted for assassination as a result of these attacks.
I want to go and stay on the court for a moment. Yesterday, they granted cert in the case of Loper Bright, which is considering overturning the Chevron deference doctrine. I've been discussing it all morning with the audience. I hope it's at 7-1. Justice Jackson Brown Kennedy has, Justice Jackson has recused herself.
Recused.
Yeah, so it could be 6-2. What do you think? 7-1, 6-2?
I hope it's 7-1. It seems odd to me. Well, it just seems wrong to me to say that the authority of these agencies comes from a legislative grant of authority. But if it's ambiguous, then the agency can interpret its authority, the legal question of its authority for itself, and the court will defer to that. That just strikes me as wrong from the beginning, and I hope they overrule the Chevron doctrine.
Okay, last question, Senator, goes to age. You referenced, and it's a fine thing to say. You and I are both seniors. We're both eligible for, and I'm not collecting, I'm sure, I don't know if you are, Social Security, but we are not infirm. I think the President of the United States is infirm, and based on what he did yesterday, what do you think, and should he be running again?
You know, the question I ask myself, in a country of 330 million people, is this the best we can do? And I don't think it is the best we can do. And, you know, fortunately, unlike Russia, unlike China, these autocracies, these virtual dictatorships, the great thing about our democracy is we have the capacity to self-correct. And we need to do that in 2024 because the path we're on, obviously looking at every poll, is the wrong path. And we need to get back to basics.
Do your friends across the aisle, and you have many of them, Senator Cornyn, do they ever worry with you about who is running the ship over there? We have less than a minute. I mean, do they ever confess to you worry?
Well, mainly what they say is they're never consulted. I think it's pretty much common knowledge that it's the staff at the White House that runs the show. It certainly isn't President Biden, and they are reading the polls. They're listening to their base, and they're refusing to do important and fundamental things like enforce the law at the border. We've seen the disastrous consequences with this recent shooting by an illegal alien who, by existing law, can't own a firearm, killing 5 people in execution style. It's just outrageous.
Senator John Cornyn, always good to talk to you, Senator. Keep coming back. We're the seniors on the circuit, but we're not going to shut up because we're not infirm. We know what we're doing. Senator Cornyn, good to talk to you. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show. Go to the universe if you want to hear the grand old pod today. And you got to give us your phone number. You got to sign up for texting if you're going to text us. It's working. It's working. And I can finally do my focus groups.